Pizzaverse Studios presents the Witness Protection Rebranding Agency. Has life handed you a stack of court documents thicker than a New York phone book? Did your 5-year plan unexpectedly become a federal indictment? Do complete strangers keep bringing up inconvenient public records? Well, congratulations, you're ready for the Witness Protection Rebranding Agency, TM, where yesterday's headlines become today's content strategy. Why spend years explaining your past when you can spend hours talking about it on the internet? At Witness Protection Rebranding Agency, TM, our highly trained team of absolutely unqualified image consultants specializes in one thing: helping people discover that every podcast has a microphone, and every microphone has an audience. We'll help you master timeless classics like, people don't know the whole story. There's more to it than that. Nobody understands what really happened, and everyone's favorite, I was just telling the truth. Amazing. Need a studio? We'll find one. Need a logo? We'll make it bigger. Need confidence, buddy? We sell it by the gallon. Our revolutionary selective biography package, TM, helps organize decades of questionable decisions into neat little interview clips. Because nothing says fresh start quite like hit that subscribe button. But wait, call in the next 15 minutes, and we'll include our exclusive Historical Revision Emergency Kit, TM. It comes complete with 1 ring light, 2 podcast microphones, 3 hours of uninterrupted storytelling, and absolutely zero ability to delete publicly available court records. That's right, because while you can rebrand yourself, federal archives remain stubbornly difficult to unsubscribe from. So don't wait. Call the Witness Protection Rebranding Agency, TM, today. Because memories fade, but paperwork is forever. Witness Protection Rebranding Agency, TM, is a work of satire. We do not remove indictments, guilty pleas, sentencing records, sworn testimony, newspaper archives, internet screenshots, or uncomfortable questions from journalists. If your historical record continues to exist for more than several decades, that's completely normal. Pizzaverse Studios, we don't rewrite history, we excavate it. Disclaimer: this documentary is going to examine organized crime, violence, federal prosecutions, cooperation agreements, and the consequences that follow. So before somebody jumps into the comments screaming that we're attacking their favorite former gangster, relax. This documentary isn't about loyalty to personalities. It's about loyalty to evidence. Everything discussed here comes from publicly available court records, sworn testimony, sentencing documents, historical reporting, and other publicly documented sources. When something is disputed or alleged, we'll tell you it's disputed or alleged. Pizzaverse Studios does not glorify organized crime. We don't sell the fantasy. We don't buy the mythology. Because behind every romantic mob story are victims, grieving families, extortion victims, businesses destroyed by fear, and people who never got a second chance. Hollywood sells legends. Court records usually tell a much uglier story. Welcome to Analyzing Evil.
Analyzing Evil, Dominick Cicale, Cooperation, Controversy, and the Cost of Survival. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Tonight we're going to examine organized crime, violence, federal prosecutions, cooperation agreements, and the consequences that follow. So before somebody jumps into the comments screaming that we're attacking their favorite former gangster, go fuck yourself. Relax. This documentary isn't about loyalty to personalities. It's about loyalty to evidence. Everything discussed here comes from publicly available court records, sworn testimony, sentencing documents, historical reporting, and other publicly documented sources. When something is disputed or alleged, we'll tell you it's disputed or alleged. Pizzaverse Studios does not glorify organized crime. We don't sell the fantasy. We don't buy the mythology. Because behind every romantic mob story are victims, grieving families, extortion victims, businesses destroyed by fear, and people who never got a second chance. Hollywood sells legends. Court records usually tell a much uglier story. Welcome to Analyzing Evil. What is evil? Most people imagine evil wearing a mask. History usually tells a different story. Evil rarely introduces itself by announcing, "I'm the bad guy." Instead, it speaks quietly. It's just business. I'm protecting my family. I didn't have a choice. Everybody else was doing it. Psychologists call these kinds of thought patterns moral disengagement, ways people distance themselves from the harm they cause so they can keep functioning. Organized crime depends on those rationalizations. The violence becomes routine. The victims become statistics. Loyalty becomes conditional. Fear becomes currency. And eventually, survival outweighs every principle that once seemed unbreakable. That doesn't explain one individual. It explains a system. And tonight, that's what we're examining. Not mythology. Not internet folklore. The documented record. What this documentary is about. This is not a celebration of the mafia. It's not a celebration of cooperators. It's not an attempt to rewrite history. We'll examine documented criminal conduct, cooperation with law enforcement, courtroom testimony, and the ethical questions that continue to surround those events. We'll also look at the broader psychological mechanisms, how criminal organizations create loyalty, how fear shapes decision-making, and how people justify harmful acts before, during, and after they're committed. Because organized crime doesn't just damage its victims. It damages everyone inside it as well. Tonight, we're setting aside movie dialogue. We're setting aside internet myths. We're setting aside personality cults. And we're asking one question. When the code collapses, what does the record actually say? This is Analyzing Evil. The making of a mobster. Nobody is born into this world carrying a gun in one hand and a code of silence in the other. Organized crime doesn't recruit monsters. It recruits people. Young men looking for identity. Looking for respect. Looking for money. Looking for someone to tell them they finally belong somewhere. That's one of the greatest lies organized crime ever sold. Not that crime pays, but that crime creates family. Dominick Cicale would eventually become part of the Bonanno crime family, one of New York's infamous 5 families. By his own admissions in court, he became involved in serious organized criminal activity that included racketeering and violent crime before later cooperating with federal authorities. By the time the public learned his name, the damage had already been done. But understanding what happened later requires understanding the environment that came first. For decades, New York organized crime wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was an alternative government. Neighborhood disputes, illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, construction, labor unions, nightclubs, protection schemes. Influence wasn't measured by elections. It was measured by fear. The mafia built an economy where violence wasn't the first option. It was the guarantee behind every other option. Pay, or something happens. Cooperate, or something happens. Talk, and something happens. That system survives because most people never have to see the violence. They only have to believe it's waiting. Fear is cheaper than bullets. Psychologists who study organized crime often describe a process called criminal socialization. It doesn't begin with murder. It begins with normalization. A small favor. A little illegal gambling. Running errands. Collecting debts. Looking the other way. Every step feels justifiable because the previous step already became normal. By the time violence appears, the moral line disappeared miles ago. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "I'd like to become part of organized crime." Instead, they tell themselves, "I'm helping a friend. I'm earning. I'm taking care of my family. It's temporary. It's just business." Those stories become easier every day they're repeated. Hollywood loves to portray mobsters as men with principles. Reality is far less cinematic. Criminologists have repeatedly observed that organized crime groups often rely on loyalty within the group while exploiting fear outside it. Members may speak about honor and respect, but the organizations themselves exist to generate profit through illegal activity and maintain power. That doesn't mean every individual thinks the same way. But it does mean the organization rewards conduct that benefits the enterprise, not conduct that's morally right. Status comes from usefulness. Power comes from influence. Violence becomes another tool. One of the biggest myths about organized crime is that it's governed by a sacred code. History suggests something more practical. Codes are often enforced selectively. They're invoked when useful, ignored when inconvenient, broken when survival demands it. That isn't unique to one person. It's a pattern that investigators, prosecutors, and historians have documented across generations of organized crime. As Cicale's role within the Bonanno family grew, so did his involvement in criminal activity, a path that ultimately led to federal charges. He later admitted guilt to serious offenses and agreed to cooperate with investigators. That decision would become the defining event of his public life. Some view cooperation as accountability. Others view it as self-preservation. Whatever conclusion a viewer reaches, one fact remains. By the time someone is choosing between loyalty and cooperation, countless victims have already paid the price for the criminal enterprise that made the choice possible. So before we examine indictments, before we examine cooperation, before we examine courtroom testimony, remember one thing. Organized crime never starts with headlines. It starts with ordinary decisions, repeated often enough, until they no longer feel extraordinary. That's the most unsettling lesson of all. Because evil doesn't always arrive wearing a mask. Sometimes it arrives looking like opportunity. Inside the Bonanno family, people love asking the wrong question. What was it like to be in the mafia? Here's the better question. What did the mafia actually do? Because once you strip away the nicknames, the expensive suits, the movies, and the mythology, what remains is an organized criminal enterprise built to generate money through fear, intimidation, violence, and illegal activity. That's not Hollywood. That's what decades of federal prosecutions documented. The Bonanno crime family wasn't a social club. It wasn't a fraternity. It wasn't a neighborhood improvement committee. According to decades of federal investigations, it was a criminal organization engaged in racketeering, illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, labor corruption, fraud, and violence. Every promotion came with greater responsibility. Not responsibility to the community, responsibility to the enterprise. Produce money. Solve problems. Keep people quiet. Follow orders. By the time Dominick Cicale had risen through the organization, he had become part of that system. In later federal proceedings, he admitted participating in serious criminal conduct before eventually deciding to cooperate with prosecutors. Those admissions matter because they eliminate one common excuse. Nobody has to speculate whether organized crime is dangerous. Its own members have admitted it. Psychologists studying criminal organizations often point to something called group loyalty. Inside tightly organized groups, identity becomes more important than morality. Members begin asking, "Is this good for us?" instead of, "Is this right?" That's an enormous psychological shift. Because once loyalty replaces ethics, almost anything becomes justifiable. Violence, extortion, fraud, even murder. Not because members necessarily enjoy those acts, but because they're taught the organization comes first. Hollywood calls it honor. Criminologists often call it criminal identity. When someone's identity becomes completely tied to a criminal organization, walking away feels impossible. Questioning leadership feels like betrayal. Thinking independently becomes dangerous. The organization doesn't just control behavior, it reshapes identity itself. And here's where the fantasy completely falls apart. The mafia talks endlessly about loyalty. History shows loyalty often has an expiration date. Members cooperate. Bosses betray captains. Captains betray soldiers. Friends become witnesses. Witnesses become enemies. Yesterday's brother becomes tomorrow's evidence. If organized crime teaches one lesson better than any university on earth, it's this. Loyalty often lasts exactly as long as it's useful. For years, prosecutors built cases against organized crime using surveillance, wiretaps, financial records, physical evidence, and eventually, cooperators. Former insiders who decided the life they once defended was no longer worth dying in prison for. That decision transformed countless investigations. It also transformed public perception. Because suddenly, the people enforcing the code were explaining how the code actually worked. Some viewers will ask, does cooperating erase what came before? That's not for this documentary to decide. Courts determine criminal liability. History records events. Our job, is to examine the documented record honestly. Cooperation may help solve crimes. It doesn't erase crimes already committed. Both ideas can exist at the same time. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Organized crime rarely destroys itself from the outside. More often, it collapses from within. Informants, power struggles, greed, fear, internal rivalries. The same system built on secrecy eventually produces witnesses who understand it better than anyone else. That's one of organized crime's greatest ironies. The people most capable of exposing it are often the people who helped build it. As the pressure from federal investigators mounted, Dominick Cicale eventually made a decision that would define the rest of his public life. Not his rise, not his status, not his reputation inside the Bonanno family, his cooperation. That single decision would influence prosecutions, sentencing, public opinion, and years of debate over credibility, accountability, and redemption. And that's where our story turns, because the next chapter isn't about power. It's about survival. When the code breaks. Every criminal organization has one rule that's treated as sacred. Don't talk. Don't cooperate. Don't become the government's witness. For generations, that rule wasn't just tradition. It was survival. The mafia even had a word for it. Omertà. The code of silence. Hollywood turned it into poetry. Reality turned it into prison sentences. The public often imagines organized crime as a brotherhood built on unwavering loyalty. History tells a far more complicated story. Federal investigations over the last 50 years have repeatedly shown that many major mafia cases were ultimately built not just through surveillance, wiretaps, and financial records, but through insiders who decided to cooperate. That doesn't erase what those cooperators admitted doing. Nor does it automatically make everything they said false. It means the justice system relies on corroborating evidence, because cooperators often have powerful incentives to tell their stories. That's why prosecutors seek documents, recordings, financial records, and multiple witnesses, not just one person's word. By the mid-2000s, the pressure on the Bonanno family had intensified. Federal investigators had spent years assembling cases against members of New York's organized crime families. Wiretaps, physical surveillance, financial investigations, recorded conversations, search warrants, witnesses. One piece of evidence alone rarely brings down a criminal organization. Hundreds of pieces fitting together over years often do. Eventually, Dominick Cicale chose to cooperate with federal prosecutors after being charged with serious crimes. As part of that cooperation, he admitted his own criminal conduct and provided testimony in cases against other organized crime figures. The consequences of that decision would extend far beyond his own sentencing. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called self-preservation under extreme consequence. When people believe they face catastrophic loss, life imprisonment, decades behind bars, or death, the brain begins to reevaluate loyalties that once seemed absolute. Principles that felt permanent become negotiable. Not because morality suddenly changes, but because survival becomes the dominant objective. It's a pattern seen in many criminal organizations, not just the mafia. The stakes become so high that preserving oneself can eclipse every previous commitment. This is where the mythology starts to crack. For years, members may speak about loyalty, honor, and never talking. Then reality arrives, indictments, evidence, the possibility of spending the rest of one's life in prison. Some choose to fight, some choose to cooperate. The decision doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens under extraordinary pressure. Understanding that pressure doesn't excuse past crimes. It helps explain why criminal organizations so often unravel from the inside. The justice system has long recognized that cooperating witnesses present both value and risk. Value, because they can explain how secretive organizations operate. Risk, because they may have incentives to minimize their own conduct or maximize someone else's role. That's why courts instruct juries to evaluate cooperating witness testimony carefully, and why prosecutors seek corroboration whenever possible. The system doesn't ask jurors to blindly believe. It asks them to weigh the evidence. The public debate surrounding Dominick Cicale has reflected those same tensions. Some see cooperation as a step toward accountability. Others question motives, credibility, or the benefits received in exchange for cooperation. Those debates are part of the public record and continue today. This documentary isn't here to settle them. It's here to examine them honestly. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Organized crime creates impossible choices. Not because the choices themselves are impossible, but because every available option carries consequences. Stay silent, go to prison, cooperate, face the lifelong consequences of breaking the code. Neither path erases the past. Neither path restores the lives already damaged. The victims don't get a reset button. Their losses remain. So when people ask, who was loyal? Maybe that's the wrong question. Perhaps the better question is, what kind of organization creates a world where every ending is built on betrayal? Because in the end, the code didn't collapse because outsiders misunderstood it. It collapsed because reality proved stronger than mythology. The courtroom testimony, credibility, and the weight of the record. Courtrooms are strange places. The streets reward reputation. The courtroom demands evidence. Out on the street, people can tell stories. In federal court, those stories become testimony. Every sentence can be challenged. Every contradiction can be explored. Every witness carries baggage, especially a witness who once admitted participating in organized crime. Hollywood loves courtroom drama. The reality is far less glamorous. A cooperator doesn't walk into court as a hero. He walks in with baggage. He's already admitted committing crimes. He's already negotiated with prosecutors. Everyone in that courtroom understands he has reasons to want a favorable outcome. The defense knows it. The prosecution knows it. The judge knows it. The jury knows it. That's why credibility becomes one of the most important issues in any case involving cooperating witnesses. When Dominick Cicale testified in federal prosecutions, his testimony became one piece of a much larger evidentiary picture. Prosecutors relied not only on cooperating witnesses, but also on wiretaps, surveillance, financial records, physical evidence, and other testimony. That's how complex organized crime cases are built. rarely on one witness alone. But every cooperating witness faces the same question. Can they be believed? Not because they once committed crimes. That's already established. But because they're asking a jury to trust someone who admits they once lived by deception. Defense attorneys are paid to challenge witnesses. That's their job. They examine inconsistencies, prior statements, motives, deals with prosecutors, memory, bias, everything. Not because it is personal, because that's how justice is supposed to work. A courtroom isn't built on blind trust. It's built on testing evidence. Over the years, public court filings and appeals involving cases in which Cicale testified included challenges to aspects of his credibility and motives. Those filings reflect the adversarial nature of criminal trials and appeals, where defense lawyers seek to undermine government witnesses and prosecutors defend their reliability. Not every argument succeeds. Not every challenge fails. That's why appeals courts review the record. The legal system is designed around that tension. Here's something people often misunderstand. A witness can be deeply flawed and still tell the truth about certain events. A witness can also tell the truth about many things and be mistaken or challenged on others. Human memory isn't a video recording. It's imperfect, especially when recalling events years later. That's one reason corroborating evidence matters so much. Psychologists refer to a phenomenon called motivated reasoning. People naturally interpret events in ways that align with their goals or interests. That doesn't automatically mean they're lying. It means human beings are complicated. When someone's future depends on persuading others, their incentives become part of the story. That's why courts don't ask juries to accept testimony uncritically. They ask juries to evaluate it alongside everything else. This documentary isn't here to relitigate federal cases. Jurors heard the evidence. Judges ruled on legal questions. Appeals courts reviewed the record. Our purpose is different. We're examining how organized crime, cooperation, and the justice system intersect, and why those intersections continue to generate debate years later. By the time the trials ended, the courtroom battles were over. The prison sentences had been handed down. But another chapter was beginning. Not inside a courthouse. Not inside a social club. On television. In books. On podcasts. And eventually, on YouTube. The organized crime story wasn't ending. It was changing platforms. The question was no longer, what happened? The question became, who gets to tell the story? From the witness stand to the camera lens, the business of the mob story. History doesn't end when someone leaves prison. Sometimes, that's when the second career begins. Books. Podcasts. Interviews. Speaking engagements. YouTube channels. The modern era has created something previous generations of organized crime never had. An audience. 30 years ago, if a former mobster wanted to tell his story, He needed a publisher. Today, all he needs is a camera. And that's changed everything. Former gangsters, former agents, former prosecutors, journalists, authors. Everyone now competes for the same thing: attention. Because attention has become currency, there is nothing inherently wrong with telling your story. Former criminals have every right to discuss their lives. Historians interview them. Journalists interview them. Law enforcement has relied on their accounts for decades. The difficult question isn't whether someone should speak. It's how they speak. And how the audience evaluates what they're hearing. Every storyteller has incentives. Authors want readers, podcasters want listeners, YouTubers want subscribers, media personalities want views. That's true whether someone is a retired detective, a historian, or a former member of organized crime. The audience should remember that, not as cynicism, as media literacy. Psychologists call this narrative identity. Human beings naturally build stories that explain who they are. We emphasize certain moments. We minimize others. We reinterpret our past. That doesn't necessarily mean deception. It means people understand themselves through stories. The challenge for viewers is separating the story from the documented record. When former organized crime figures become public personalities, another ethical question appears. Can someone genuinely educate the public about organized crime without accidentally turning organized crime into entertainment? That's not a simple question. Some argue these interviews expose criminal organizations. Others worry they create celebrities out of people whose notoriety began with violence. Reasonable people can disagree. At Pizzaverse Studios, our position is simple. We don't care how famous somebody becomes. We don't care how many subscribers somebody has. We don't care how many interviews somebody gives. If the documented record contradicts the mythology, we're following the record, not the personality. That's one of the biggest problems with internet culture. People begin following individuals instead of evidence. One creator says one thing, another creator says something else. Viewers pick sides. Soon, history becomes a popularity contest. But federal court records don't care who won the comment section. Sentencing documents don't care who got the most views. Evidence isn't measured in subscribers. This documentary isn't asking you to like anyone. It isn't asking you to dislike anyone. It's asking something much harder. Think critically. Question sources. Read beyond headlines. Recognize that every public figure, including former mobsters, journalists, prosecutors, and YouTubers, has a perspective. That doesn't automatically make them right or wrong. It means their claims deserve scrutiny. The internet rewards certainty. History rewards patience. That's why our job isn't to crown heroes, it's to examine evidence. Because once personalities become more important than facts, the truth becomes the first casualty. As organized crime entered the digital age, its stories found a second life online. The violence became anecdotes, the indictments became interview topics, the courtroom became a podcast studio. But one thing never changed. Behind every compelling story, there were real victims. People who never got a microphone, people whose names rarely appear in thumbnails, people whose lives ended long before YouTube existed. Those voices matter too, and we're going to talk about them. Because every organized crime story has two versions, the one told by the people who survived and the one lived by the people who didn't. The human cost the victim's organized crime left behind. Let's do something that mob stories almost never do. Let's stop talking about the gangsters. Let's talk about everyone else. Because organized crime has always been very good at selling personalities. It has never been very good at acknowledging victims. Movies remember the boss. History should remember the people caught in the crossfire. Every extortion payment came from someone who worked for it. Every loan shark victim was somebody's husband, somebody's wife, somebody's son, somebody's daughter. Every act of intimidation left somebody wondering whether they were going to make it home. Fear doesn't end when the collection is over. It lingers. Sometimes for years. One of the greatest myths ever created is that organized crime only hurts other criminals. History doesn't support that. Business owners, construction workers, union members, restaurant owners, neighbors, families, jurors, witnesses, police officers, federal agents, journalists. Entire communities have lived under the shadow of organized crime. Not because they chose to, because someone else made that choice for them. Psychologists who study trauma often point out that violence doesn't only affect the person standing in front of it. It spreads. Children grow up without parents. Families carry fear for decades. Communities become suspicious. Trust disappears. That's the real inheritance of organized crime. Not respect. Not honor. Trauma. This is where documentaries often lose the plot. They spend 2 hours talking about the criminals, and 5 seconds mentioning the victims. We're not doing that, because the victims are the reason the story matters. Without them, this becomes entertainment. And organized crime has already had enough free advertising. Think about it. Every headline announcing an arrest represents years of damage that happened before the cameras arrived. Years of illegal businesses. Years of threats. Years of fear. Years of crimes that investigators were still trying to piece together. By the time someone reaches federal court, the story has already hurt countless people. There's another uncomfortable truth. When former organized crime figures tell their stories, they're often the ones holding the microphone. The victims rarely get that opportunity. Many simply try to rebuild their lives. Others never get the chance. That imbalance matters. Because history shouldn't only preserve the voices of the people who committed crimes. It should preserve the voices of those who endured them. This documentary isn't about deciding who deserves forgiveness. That's a personal question. It isn't about deciding who should be famous. That's a cultural question. It's about remembering that every organized crime story has consequences that extend far beyond the people sitting at the table. The public sees the courtroom. Victims lived through everything that happened before it. At Pizzaverse Studios, We don't romanticize gangsters. We don't crown kings. We don't hand out halos. If someone committed crimes, that's part of the story. If someone cooperated, that's part of the story. If someone reinvented themselves afterward, that's part of the story too. But none of those chapters erase the people who paid the price. Those victims deserve to remain at the center of the conversation, not pushed into the footnotes. Because evil isn't measured by how famous someone becomes. It's measured by the damage left behind. Money can be replaced. Buildings can be rebuilt. Organizations can collapse. But some families spend the rest of their lives carrying a chair that stays empty. No documentary should ever forget that. Reinvention: can a man outrun his own history? Reinvention. Everybody wants a second chance. That's human. Society believes people can change. The justice system is built in part on that belief. Serve your sentence. Accept responsibility. Move forward. Those are admirable goals. But there's another question that rarely gets asked. Can someone reinvent themselves without rewriting the past? The modern internet has created something unique. Former prosecutors have YouTube channels. Former detectives have podcasts. Former intelligence officers write books. Former organized crime members build audiences. The public has an appetite for stories from people who were once behind the curtain. Sometimes those stories educate. Sometimes they entertain. Sometimes they blur the line between the two. Reinvention isn't unusual. What's unusual is reinvention under a spotlight. When a former organized crime figure becomes a public personality, every interview becomes part history, part autobiography, and part performance. Not necessarily because anyone intends to deceive, but because every public appearance tells a story. The audience has to decide how much of that story is supported by the historical record. Psychologists describe something called impression management. It's the way human beings consciously or unconsciously shape how others see them. Everyone does it. Job interviews, political campaigns, television appearances, social media. Nobody presents every flaw on day one. We all edit ourselves. Public figures simply do it on a larger stage. That doesn't mean someone is lying. It means viewers should remain thoughtful. Ask questions. Compare claims against documents. Read the court filings. Look beyond clips. Don't outsource critical thinking to personalities. One of the dangers of internet culture is something called parasocial attachment. Viewers begin feeling they personally know creators they've never met. Agreement becomes loyalty. Criticism becomes betrayal. Evidence becomes secondary. That's not healthy for creators or audiences. A documentary shouldn't ask you to join a team. It should ask you to examine the facts. At Pizzaverse Studios, we don't keep score based on subscriber counts. We don't decide credibility by comment sections, and we don't confuse popularity with accuracy. History isn't decided by algorithms. It's decided by evidence. People often ask, can someone who committed serious crimes ever contribute something meaningful afterward? Reasonable people answer that question differently. Some believe cooperation and openness help expose criminal organizations. Others believe notoriety risks overshadowing accountability. Those are legitimate public debates. This documentary isn't here to settle them. It's here to recognize that both questions exist. Here's what we do know. The organized crime life leaves scars on victims, on families, on communities, and often on the people who lived inside it. No interview can erase that. No podcast can rewrite it. No camera can change the past. History remains exactly where it has always been. Waiting in court transcripts, sentencing records, and the lives forever altered by violence. So the question isn't, can someone reinvent themselves? Of course they can. People reinvent themselves every day. The real question is, what responsibilities come with that reinvention? Honesty, accountability, transparency, humility? Those questions belong to every public figure, not just former mobsters. Because history has a stubborn habit. It waits, long after the headlines fade, long after the interviews end, long after the cameras stop rolling. History is still there, asking the same question it always has. Not, what did you say? But, what does the record show? The record, the myth, and the final verdict. Every organized crime story eventually reaches the same destination. Not a social club, not a restaurant, not a YouTube live stream, a courtroom, a cemetery, or a prison. Sometimes all three. For decades, organized crime carefully crafted its own mythology. The honorable gangster, the loyal soldier, the family man, the man of respect. It was a brilliant marketing campaign. Unfortunately for the mythology, the court record exists, the indictments exist, the guilty pleas exist, the victims exist. Reality has an inconvenient habit of surviving long after the legends fade. Dominick Cicale's story isn't remarkable because it's unique. It's remarkable because it illustrates a pattern seen throughout organized crime history. A rise through a criminal organization, participation in serious crime, federal prosecution, cooperation, a reduced sentence, a second life in the public eye. The details belong to one man. The pattern belongs to organized crime itself. This documentary was never about deciding whether someone deserves applause. It wasn't about deciding who wins internet arguments. It wasn't about personality. It was about evidence. Because personalities fade, evidence doesn't. Throughout this series, we've explored several psychological concepts. Moral disengagement, the process of convincing yourself harmful acts are simply business. Criminal socialization, the slow normalization of conduct most people would never imagine participating in. Self-preservation, the instinct that often overrides loyalty when freedom is on the line. Narrative identity, the stories people tell themselves and others to make sense of the past. None of these ideas excuse crime. They help explain how human beings become capable of extraordinary harm. There's an uncomfortable lesson hiding inside all of this. Most people imagine evil as something dramatic, something obvious. History says otherwise. Evil often looks ordinary, a conversation, a rationalization, a compromise, one bad decision, then another, until eventually, there's no road back. The mafia didn't survive for generations because everyone involved was fearless. It survived because fear became a business model. Fear of violence, fear of isolation, fear of prison, fear of talking, fear of not talking. At Pizzaverse Studios, we refuse to romanticize that. We don't care how stylish the suits were. We don't care how famous the nicknames became. We don't care how many books were written. when innocent people suffer. There is nothing glamorous left to admire. If there's one thing this documentary hopes you'll remember, it's this. Don't confuse storytelling with truth. Don't confuse confidence with credibility. Don't confuse popularity with accuracy. Read. Question. Verify. Think critically. The truth can survive scrutiny. Myths usually can't. History doesn't need us to protect it. It needs us to read it honestly. Because organized crime has already spent nearly a century writing its own legend. Maybe it's finally time to let the evidence write the ending. Final words. Some people will watch this documentary and see redemption. Others will see opportunism. Others will simply see another chapter in the long history of American organized crime. You don't have to agree with our conclusions. But we hope you'll leave asking better questions than when you arrived. Because that's what serious documentaries are supposed to do. Not tell you what to think. Teach you how to think. The mafia promised power. The victims inherited the consequences. The record remains. Every organized crime story eventually ends the same way. Not with applause, not with respect, not with glory, with evidence. Court transcripts, sentencing memorandums, victim impact statements, photographs that can never be retaken, families that never became whole again. That is the legacy organized crime leaves behind for generations. The mafia sold an illusion that violence was honor, that extortion was business, that silence was loyalty, that fear deserved respect. History rejected every one of those lies, because no matter how carefully the myth is polished, the truth always scratches through the paint. Dominick Cicale's story is one chapter in a much larger history. A history of organized crime, federal investigations, cooperation, controversy, and consequences. Whether viewers see redemption, survival, or something else entirely, one fact remains. The documented record exists, and it deserves to be examined honestly. At Pizzaverse Studios, we don't produce documentaries to make gangsters look larger than life. We produce documentaries to make history larger than mythology. Because the victims deserve better than becoming footnotes, and the audience deserves better than fairy tales. If this documentary challenged something you believed, good. History should challenge us. If it made you uncomfortable, good. Truth usually isn't comfortable. If it made you curious enough to read the documents for yourself, then we've done our job. The purpose of analyzing evil has never been to crown heroes or manufacture villains. It's to understand how ordinary decisions, ordinary rationalizations, and ordinary human weaknesses can produce extraordinary destruction. Because evil rarely announces itself. More often, it explains itself. And that's exactly why it has to be examined. If you made it this far, first, thank you. Because documentaries like this aren't built in an afternoon. Every court document, every sentencing memorandum, every historical source, every hour of research, every frame, every word. It all takes time. And that's exactly why we do it. Because history deserves more than clickbait. It deserves context. If you enjoy documentaries that go beyond the headlines, you've found your home. Here at Pizzaverse Studios, we don't chase rumors. We chase the record. From organized crime, to forgotten history, to Hollywood, to true crime, to the darkest stories ever told. Our mission remains the same. We don't rewrite history. We excavate it. If you enjoyed this documentary, help us keep making them. Hit subscribe. Ring that notification bell. Leave a comment. Share this documentary with someone who enjoys evidence over mythology. Check out our growing library of documentaries, including Analyzing Evil, The Bonanno Family, The North Hollywood Shootout, Heat the True Story, The Women of Prohibition, The Dark Origins of Cinderella, The River Kwai War, and many more. Because history isn't boring. People just keep telling it badly. And if there's a documentary, a historical mystery, a mob case, a forgotten crime, or a story you think deserves the Pizzaverse treatment, drop it in the comments. We read them. Some of our biggest projects started with one viewer saying, "Hey Bambi, have you ever looked into this?" From all of us here at Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions, thank you for believing that research still matters. Thank you for supporting independent creators. And thank you for joining us as we continue digging beneath the headlines, one story at a time. We'll see you in the next documentary. Until then, stay curious. Question everything. And remember, history leaves evidence. It's our job to find it.
Every criminal organization has a code built on loyalty, silence, and the promise that no matter what happens, you never cooperate. But what happens when that code breaks? This time, Pizzaverse Studios examines the life of Gene Borello, a man who chased respect in the streets, lived by violence, faced federal prosecution, and ultimately chose to cooperate with the government after his criminal case. Was it survival? Was it self-preservation? Or was the code already dead long before anyone stepped into a courtroom? This isn't a celebration, it isn't revenge, and it isn't mob mythology. It's an examination of choices, consequences, and the psychology of betrayal. We'll separate documented history from internet legend. We'll examine the criminal lifestyle, the federal investigations, the decision to cooperate, and the complicated life that follows when a former mob associate becomes a public figure discussing organized crime. In this documentary, no one gets a free pass. Not the gangsters, not the cooperators, not the internet personalities, not the audience. Because when the cameras turn off and the interviews end, only one question remains: what is left after the code is gone? Analyzing Evil, Gene Borello from street soldier to government witness. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. Coming soon. Because history doesn't care about excuses, it only remembers the record.
Yeah. I done did a lot of things in my day, I admit it, I don't take back what I say. If I said it, then I meant it. All my life I won a Grammy, but I probably never get it. I ain't never had no trophy or no motherfucking ribbon. Fuck the system, I'm that nigga, bend the law, cut the rules. I'm about to risk it all, I ain't got too much to lose. Y'all been eating long enough, it's my turn to cut the food. Pass the plate, win my drink, this my day. Lucky you, fuck you too. Woo! Y'all gotta move, y'all gotta move. Gotta move, give me some room, give me some room, give me the juice. How about the coupe? How about the coupe? How about the shoot? Y'all gotta move, y'all gotta move, give me the juice. Back on my bullshit, my back to the wall, turn my back on you, all of you finished. Back to these bullets, it's back to the job, put my Mac out and all of you running. Back on my hood shit, it's back to the pushing, these taxing, I'm actually pumping. Can't fuck with you rappers, you practically sucking. You might have went platinum, but that don't mean nothing. I'm actually buzzing this time. Straight out the kitchen, I told them the oven is mine. I do not fuck with you guys. If I don't kill you, just know you gon' suffer this time. I ain't no gangster, but I got some bangers, some chains and some blazing, a couple of nines. Choppers and jimmies, a partridge, a petri. My 20s and Christmas was nothing but lies. Run at you hard like a sumo. They say I talk like a chulo. I live in Mars, I'm not Bruno. Bitch, I'm a duck, call me Cujo. You play your cards, I reverse on you all, and I might just drop all like a Uno. Cállate boca, my home, they call it Obuto, and all of you culo. Never better to level up in the ghetto, looking for something I probably can never find now. Shit irrelevant till the beat die down. The stupid niggas just really want me tied down. I've been alone and I never needed nobody, just only me and my shawty. I tell these niggas to lie down. Keep all the money, I never wanted a lifestyle. But I pray to God, I'm gonna be all right now. I said ain't no love for the other side or anyone who ever wants smoke. When I die, I'm going out as the underdog who never lost hope. You in the wrong cab, down the wrong path, nigga, wrong way, wrong road. Snakes in the grass, trying to slither fast. I just bought a fucking lawnmower.
I said a lot of things in my day. I admit it, this is payback in a way. I regret it that I did it. I done won a couple Grammys, but I sold my soul to get them. Wasn't in it for the trophies, just the fucking recognition. Fuck's the difference, I'm that cracker, been the law, fuck the rules. Man, I used to risk it all, now I got too much to lose. I've been eating long enough, man, my stomach should be full. I just ate, lick the plate, my buffet. Lucky me, fuck you think. I got a couple of mentions, still I don't have any manners. You got a couple of ghostwriters, but to these kids it don't actually matter. They're asking me what the fuck happened to hip-hop. I said I don't have any answers, cause I took a nap when I dropped my last album. It hurt me like hell, but I'm back on these rappers. And actually coming from humble beginnings, I'm somewhat uncomfortable winning. I wish I could say what a wonderful feeling. We're on the upswing like we're punching the ceiling, but nothing is feeling like anyone has any fucking ability to even stick to a subject. It's killing me, the inability to pin humility. Why don't we make a bunch of fucking songs about nothing and mumble and bucket? I'm going for the juggler, shit is a circus. You clowns that are coming up don't give an ounce of a motherfucker about the ones who were here before you that made rap. Let's recap, way back, and tease that, recap on tape decks, 8 tats for the G-raps. That we need 3 stacks ASAP and bring that to the ace back, cause half of these rappers have brain damage. On a lean rapping, face tats syrupped out like tree sap. I don't hate trap and I don't wanna seem mad, but in fact would've owed me at the same cat that would take that feedback and aim back. I need that, but I think it's inevitable. They know what button to press or whatever to pull to get me to snap though. And if I paid attention, I'm probably making it bigger, but you've been taking your dicks on a fucking backhoe. On the freaking minute, got me thinking of finishing everything with a seed, a minute and reaping the benefits. I'm asleep at the wheel again as I'm thinking and thinking about an evil intent of another beat. I'm a kill again, cause even if I got it in a beating a pill again, even ketamine and methamphetamine with a mini tin, it better be at least 70 or 300 milligram, and I might as well, cause I'ma end up being a villain again. Levels to the shit, I got an elevator. You could never say to me I'm not a fucking record breaker. I sound like a broken record every time I break a record. Nobody could ever take away the legacy I made. I never cater, motherfucker, never got a right to be this way. I got spite inside my DNA, but I roll till the wheels fall off. I'm working tirelessly, it's the moment y'all been waiting for, like California wishing rain and pour, and that drought y'all been praying for. My downfall, from the 8 Mile to the South Pass to the same marshal, that outlaw that they say is a writer might have fell off. I'm back on that bull like the cowboy. So y'all gotta move, yeah, y'all gotta move, yeah, y'all gotta move. Give me some room, give me some room, give me the juice. How about the coupe? How about the coupe? How about the shoot? Y'all gotta move, y'all gotta move. Give me the juice.